It's been a day and a half of look over there tactics coming out of the White House. And ever since we learned 3 former Trump campaign aides were charged, 1 pled guilty, the administration has been distancing itself bigly. This morning, the president went on his daily tweet storm, declaring few people knew the young, low-level volunteer named George, who is already proven to be a liar. Check the Dems. George is, of course, George Papadopoulos, former Trump campaign foreign policy advisor who, as I said, pled guilty to lying to the FBI about his contacts with Russian agents. And Trump aides, both past and present, hammered the point home today.
What Papadopoulos did was lie, and that's on him, not on the campaign, and we can't speak for that.
The guy he was the coffee boy. And all of this contact with alleged Russians is something completely beyond the scope of his volunteer duties.
But the most bizarre case of White House misdirection comes from none other than Trump Chief of Staff John Kelly, who in an interview with Fox News' Laura Ingraham last night took the opportunity to praise Confederate General Robert E. Lee.
Robert E. Lee was an honorable man. He was a man that gave up his country to fight for his state, which in 150 years ago was more important than country. It was always loyalty to state first back in those days. The lack of an ability to compromise led to the Civil War. And men and women of good faith on both sides made their stand where their conscience had them make their stand.
Sounds like the boss to me. Meanwhile, the Daily Beast is reporting Steve Bannon has been calling Trump, telling him to fire his lawyers and employ a, quote, much more aggressive legal approach short of firing Bob Mueller. Joining me to talk about all this are Lylah Alphonse. She's managing news editor at U.S. News and World Report. Hey, Lylah.
Hey.
Nestor Ramos is a columnist at the Boston Globe. Hey there, Nestor. Good to see you. Let me start with you. So far, nothing has stuck to either citizen or President Trump with his base. Will this...
I don't think so. I don't think it really does. I mean,
why?
It's hard to say that your campaign manager had nothing to do with your campaign. But really what they're focused on is whether or not this implicates Trump himself as a person.
But it's day one.
It is day one.
He listed this guy as one of his 5 major foreign policy advisors.
They're not thinking about how these kind of investigations actually work. They're thinking about law and order and criminal intent and CSI and how you name your suspect and the show is done. And that's not how it works in this case. These are the first baby steps that lead to something else. It can take a year or more.
You know, if you believe this, it's sort of like what Trump said. I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and I wouldn't lose a soul. Is that what this is?
Yeah, I mean, that has turned out to be one of the more true things he's said, right? Mm-hmm. There's precious little evidence that the people who most support him will ever turn on him. And there's not much evidence that's getting smaller. Rather, the polling shows that we had a great story about this on BostonGlobe.com. The polling shows that, in fact, his constituents shape their own worldviews to him rather than the other way around.
Shifts.
They're not reading the New York Times. They're not reading the Washington Post. They're not looking at CNN or
watch
MSNBC.
Television?
And yesterday, while all this was breaking, Fox News had something on cheeseburger emojis.
I love cheeseburger emojis.
They're fantastic.
You know, so is it trust in him, though, or is it lack of trust in us? I don't know if you saw this political poll. It was frightening the last couple of days. Look at these numbers. Do major news organizations fabricate news stories about Trump? 46 to 37. The answer is yes. I have seen the enemy. You're looking at him right here.
Yeah, I mean, I get emails like that from time to time, and I sort of wonder how these people sort of stumbled into my email. If you believe that, why did you read this story in the first, to which you're responding in the
first
place?
You just go to fakenews.com and we get your Twitter account.
Right, I guess. Maybe I got linked somewhere I've never heard of.
See, I think it's even, if you were right, I think it has potential to get worse, because while they were originally saying, you know, Hillary Clinton, lock her up, lock her up, lock her up, when Tony Podesta, the brother of John Podesta, who was obviously the chair of the Clinton campaign, yesterday withdraws from his lobbying firm after reports that he had a Paul Manafort connection vis-a-vis Ukraine, I say to myself, the next indictment, I know nothing, and I've been wrong every prediction I've ever made, next indictment is Tony Podesta giving some weight to Trump at all, saying, see what I told you? The real corrupt, colluding people are those horrible Democrats, and he's finally going to have some meat on the bone.
I think there's some false equivalence there.
How so?
It's unlikely that the Clinton campaign colluded with Russia in order to lose an election.
I'm talking about Tony Podesta, not the campaign itself. Podesta.
Then there could be something there also. But I think people are forgetting that this investigation isn't actually about Trump the man. It's not about whether Trump himself colluded. It's about whether it could turn into that. But it's about whether an adversarial foreign power tried to influence anyone on a campaign in order to swing the election in a way that would favor this other country.
And the campaign wanted to be influenced because they were colluding. And we all
That's
have to
not
say
even.
the
That's not
mandatory
even
is
what
not a
they're.
crime.
That's not even what technically the investigation is about. It's whether.
Well, no one's committed a crime here if it turns out
and collusion,
all that happened was Russia.
Collusion's not a federal
I
criminal
understand
crime.
that, but the underlying acts.
Right. But the issue is anyone connected or involved in the campaign, not the candidate, not necessarily the candidate's kid, not necessarily the candidate's advisor, anyone connected to the campaign.
Right, but as it
and that's
moves
what's
further
turning
up
up
the
now.
change, I mean, his paper says today, Trump White House, quote, freaking out over this stuff. See, almost everything they do, I read about Steve Bannon today, the thing I said a minute ago, and I said, he doesn't care if Trump changes his lawyers. He's laying the foundation to be able to say, the only reason this has even gotten this far is because the sainted president has the worst lawyers in America, and that story will be it's further misdirection, is it not?
Sure, and I mean, Bannon has shown time and again that he's particularly interested in either being or seeming powerful, right? So this notion that he's still advising behind the scenes and they had to fire him to make things look good plays right into Bannon's self-image. So anything he says can be taken with some measure of a grain of salt.
Speaking of measure a grain of salt, this is a constant grain of salt, in my opinion. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, again, today she's talking about how being asked whether this investigation, these indictments are a distraction for the president. Here she is.
You guys seem completely obsessed with this while there are a lot of other things happening around the country. Instead of the focus being constantly on tax cuts and tax reform, my guess is if you look at the records, the questions that I take in here day out have far more to do with an investigation that, frankly, most Americans don't care too much about.
And my sense is they'll care less if the following happens tomorrow. The House Ways and Means Committee is supposed to release, some meat on the bones tomorrow. Mm-hmm. We all know there's going to be a lot of tax cutting for the rich. If there's one sort of simple tax cut that's directed at the middle class, what they're going to be able to say is all those horrible people the media and the Democrats want to hear about is collusion, which doesn't exist because they don't want you to get a middle class tax break, that child care tax credit that Ivanka Trump created. Isn't that what's going to happen tomorrow?
I mean, potentially, but they've been trying for months to sell this tax plan to people as a middle class tax cut, despite any evidence that it actually is one, and they failed miserably, right? All the polling shows they're, sub 30%.
Well, and there's the infighting now. Today they came out and said that they aren't going to eliminate the deduction for state and local taxes.
No, they are. They're not
tax.
going to eliminate the property tax deduction.
No, they came out with I thought they came out with also the state and local tax.
I think they're going to split the babies, from what I understand, whatever it is. Yeah, so to speak.
But then there's the whole eliminating the alternative minimum tax. That affects some of the middle class, the upper middle class.
Very few in the middle class.
Right.
But what I'm saying, I assume if Ivanka if Ivanka texted today about this child care tax credit, which has been her baby, if something's in there, even if it's minuscule, the notion is going to be, look at this. You have a kid? This is for you. And those horrible people, you and the Democrats, are trying to distract you away from supporting this kind of thing.
At this point, anything that comes up that could be a distraction will be used as a distraction. There are a lot of something shinies out there.
Was John Kelly trying to do a distraction like this? Robert E. Lee thing was analogous. I'm sure you may have thought that. It was like Charlottesville. There are a lot of fine neo-Nazis in that crowd there, too.
They've stopped dog whistling now, and now there's just a bullhorn. I mean, that was a perfect example of a Jim Crow era justification for the Civil War. It's to say that there was no compromise. There was no compromise over slavery, but all of the steps leading up to the Civil War, the three major ones involve the word compromise. You've got the 3/5 compromise. You've got the Missouri Compromise. You've got the Compromise of 1850. Lincoln's platform was a compromise. He wasn't against slavery. He didn't want to abolish slavery.
Yeah, but don't you think John Kelly is smart enough to know all that?
I think he's feeding the people the people who are watching that show what they wanted to hear and it's the same way when Trump talks about his heritage. He's born and raised in New York, the son and a grandson of immigrants. This is not his heritage, yet he's speaking for it.
What do you think? Was Kelly for real there, or was this like an intentional whatever?
I mean, I'm always reluctant with anybody, but particularly with the Trump people, to assume that they know more and are playing everybody for fools, because they've shown time and time again that they are at some fundamental level incompetent. I mean, I know this is supposed to be the guy who's the adult in the room, but there's precious little evidence of that. We see him mostly rubbing his head in dismay as his boss talks.
Or attacking a congresswoman from Florida after that Gold Star incident.
Right. And so parroting the good people on both sides line that seems to be the ethos, the driving ethos of this White House, though makes sense. It's telling who they apply that to, though.
Well, the good news is
there aren't good people on both sides when they're talking about their political opponents. Then it's crooked Hillary.
It's pretty obvious you're both feeling good about current events, which is terrific. Lylah, nice to see you. Nestor, great to see you. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.